8 years ago, the mood on the campaign trail in the U.S. was so toxic that First Lady Michelle Obama told voters, when they go low, we go high. In 2024, 1 week out in a campaign that's too close to call, it feels even darker.
Donald Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, a retired four-star general, confirmed that while Donald Trump was president, he said he wanted generals like Adolf Hitler had.
But Kamala is labeling more than half of the country as the enemy combatants, and she's calling them all fascists and Nazis, okay? But she's a fascist, okay? She's a fascist.
Yeah, to borrow the title of a famous book about the 1972 election, there's plenty of fear and loathing on the campaign trail. This in the home stretch of a U.S. presidential race that's tight, and it's marred by character assassinations, even racist tropes. We'll ask what's fueling the burning of ballot boxes and threats against poll workers. Is it about opposing interests and values? That's for certain. But in a digital age on steroids, is it also about the way frenzied punchlines are marketed and pushed to rival communities and tribes over our smartphones? On that score, we'll ask why so many of the masters of today's mass media are all too happy to allow hate to spread on their platforms and buy into Donald Trump's 2017 line after a far-right rally turned deadly that there are good people on both sides. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking how viral the hate can go in this U.S. elections finale. Joining us from Washington, D.C., Jamie Kirchick, contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, where you recently wrote a piece entitled How Lying Became Disinformation. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Veteran Republican pollster and strategist Craig Tufte is also with us from the U.S. Capitol. Good to see you.
Ça va?
We're doing good on this end. From Rome, venture capitalist Michael Fertig, founder of Heroic Ventures. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
And France 24's Ketevan Gorgistani. If you take in your vitamins, it's 7 days to go.
Yes, I have.
You're ready. Okay. If you're on the go, by the way, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Let's start with what happened on Sunday in New York. Jaws dropped on this side of the Atlantic after that big rally at Madison Square Garden by Donald Trump. Correspondent Jessica Le Mazoyer was there.
Protesters outside New York's Madison Square Garden Stadium make it clear that for them, Donald Trump is not welcome here. But thousands from all over the country have come out to see him.
The fact that this can be happening in New York City, which is one of the most democratic and welcoming and equal places to live in the country, is embarrassing.
I'm here to just remind the New York City community and the black community in New York specifically of Trump's history of racist behavior, both against my community and communities in general.
Trump's event has drawn comparisons from local officials to a Nazi rally held back in 1939 here in Madison Square Garden. It's Trump's rhetoric about immigrants, amongst other things, that have led critics to make such comparisons.
As we rescue our economy, I will also restore our borders. There's never been anything like it. It's bigger than inflation. It's bigger than the economy. What they're doing to our country, they're allowing criminals from all over the world to enter our country.
We want people here who are going to build this country better, who are going to make it better, who are going to contribute rather than to destroy and take away.
If you look at some of the tactics, especially like the way that he talks about immigrants and like dehumanizes them, like very strategically, it is similar to, you know, what you've seen in other fascist movements.
The stadium, which holds 20,000 people, was packed. Thousands more gathered outside, including Sylvia, who immigrated from Peru to New York 25 years ago. She came from Jackson Heights in Queens to see Trump with her son.
I don't believe he really wants to carry out mass deportations. He's just going to get the migrants who are delinquents out, the people who are coming here to steal.
Her son explains that he thinks it's the Venezuelans who are the problem, not the Peruvians.
Peruvians, you know, they came in to have a better job, but Venezuelans, no, they're here to kill, get arrested, rob.
Trump has promised he will win New York, a Democratic stronghold where 1 in every 5 residents was born abroad.
Kedevan Gorgistani, update us on the Trump campaign on D-7, because there was the former president who made remarks earlier in Florida before he heads to a rally in Pennsylvania, in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Yes, a rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is home to a lot of Puerto Rican Americans. And Pennsylvania itself has, among the battleground states, the largest community of Puerto Rican descent. And so the timing, of course, for Donald Trump is a little bit tricky because, of course, everyone is talking about those comments made by a comedian, not even by Donald Trump, by a comedian on Puerto Rico being an island of floating garbage. And Donald Trump probably didn't think that one of the lines of a comedian would be what makes the headlines coming out of this Madison Square Garden rally, but it is something that has grown and has become viral. And you were mentioning the sort of virality of small quotes, and this seems to have exploded, especially among Puerto Ricans, but among Latinos at large in Pennsylvania, where he's going to be going, so much so that local officials decided to shut down the schools today, out of an abundance of caution, because there might be a protest around the arena where he's going to be speaking. But the interesting thing is going to be to see whether or not he addresses those comments made by that comedian, who was handpicked by the Trump campaign to speak at that rally. The campaign itself put out a statement very quickly, distancing itself from those comments, saying that they didn't reflect the Trump campaign or Donald Trump. But Trump himself, besides saying that the rally at Madison Square Garden was a love fest, hasn't really gone into the details of those comments, even though Republican officials, especially in areas that have large Latino populations, have come out very strongly against those comments made by the comedian. And some even are pushing a little bit Donald Trump and the campaign to put out a much bigger or more worded apology when it comes to that, because they are, of course, going after the Latino vote. And this rally in Allentown was likely aimed in part at the Latino voters, and this is what we're talking about right now, and sort of overshadows probably the message that they wanted to send to the Latinos.
Craig Tufte, why is this issue, immigration and, in this case, pushed to by again, as Kedevan was saying, by the undercard at that rally to racist limits? Why is this happening in 2024?
Well, words matter. And I think what these folks are doing, both the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign, are using words that probably have been tested via polling. So I think they're moving the numbers, attempting to move the numbers by using some of these words.
So they've just found scientifically, it seems like it's off the cuff, but what you're saying is that this has been tried and tested, and this is the way they're trying to energize their base to go out and vote.
I think that's true. Anytime you use inflammatory words, it's going to cause some ripples. And I think that they are obviously doing nightly polling, tracking polls, so they know what is moving particular demographic groups, and those are obviously the words and the phrases that the candidates are using.
And is it a winning formula?
Well, unfortunately, negative campaigning and negative statements, they do work. They do move numbers.
Even when the negativity is to this extreme?
Oh, yeah. I believe, yes.
Because we remember past U.S. presidential election campaigns, there were ads that we think most notably of 1988, when there were ads about a black convict who'd been killed, and that was deemed racist. But it was a veiled kind of message. Here, there's no dog whistle. The gloves are off.
Oh, yeah. In fact, if you remember the McCain campaign, they were testing in the state of Kansas, suggesting that John McCain had a black daughter. Okay. And in the state of Kansas, would that make any difference? I would imagine at that time they were probably testing the numbers as well to see if they could move the dial.
So using Michael Furtick, using divisiveness, it's nothing new, or is it? Are we witnessing something that's never been seen before? Because it feels like that from this side of the Atlantic.
Feels like that from this side of the Atlantic. I think that Europe doesn't have a lot left, but it does have condescension. And I think Europe does like to condescend to America and its political moray and culture. And I do think that if you're not really paying very close attention to the major issues, you're going to pick up on some of the dog whistling and so forth. But actually,
but this is no longer dog whistling. This is an unfiltered racist speech we're talking about.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
Let me finish. The question is not whether the campaign is dark. The question is whether the world is in a dark moment. We are very, very close, if not already entered upon, the Third World War. The United States has had the highest amount of illegal immigration in its history in the last 4 years. You can say that you like Biden, you can say you like Harris, you can say you like Trump. But I think we should be careful about journalistic accuracy and condescension to the United States. By the way, just to correct the record, I've already caught 3 factual errors in the last few minutes just listening. Pennsylvania does not have the largest Puerto Rican population in America.
It has the largest. I said the largest. I said no. I did. I said the largest Puerto Rican population of the swing states. I said the swing states. It is correct of the swing states,
except unless you consider Florida still a swing state, which I don't.
Florida is not a swing state this time around, at least. But yes.
You know, I think that the way we talk about this does not really reflect the battle on the ground. The fact is that this comedian is getting a lot of attention, as your journalist did reflect. But the truth is that the United States, for the first time in its history, I believe, has 2 successive Democratic tickets, or political tickets of either party, where both the presidential candidate and the vice presidential candidate, first Biden-Harris, now Harris-Walz, have 0 private sector experience in their careers. 0. If you add Obama, previously, he had 2 years of private sector experience, if I'm not mistaken. So in 140 years of work experience, approximately, in the world's most important and largest economy, you have candidates who have had almost no private capital experience, private sector experience. For the first time in a very long time, Republicans are carrying working class people. Think about that. The Democratic Party is not the party of the working class in this election. Think about that.
You call it condescension, Michael Furtick. Michael Furtick, you call it condescension. Michael Furtick, you call it condescension.
Something that's like dog whistle, and I think we're covering the wrong topic. Excuse me, I think we are.
But we're seeing outright racist remarks being made. We've heard the Republican candidate talking. You heard it in that clip of Donald Trump in his speech talking about the fact that they're letting in criminals into the United States.
You can say that's racist. You can say that's racist. You can say it certainly sounds.
It just surprises like people on this side of the Atlantic to hear that from a country built by immigrants.
I got to tell you something. I think that the lens through which Europe wants to see America is a lens of great condescension, which I think is unwarranted. And I think if you actually listen to the issues that these guys are talking about, they do not want illegal immigrants crossing into the United States. By the way, recently immigrated families feel more strongly about illegal immigration, than longer-term American native families. They feel more strongly about it, statistically. So I think you're now assigning to a white guy, Donald Trump's obviously a white guy, who's obviously said a lot of really nasty stuff. He's a very nasty guy. Let's acknowledge that. But you're assigning a racist intent to him, but you're not simultaneously acknowledging that the people who support him who are not whites agree with him on this issue. Immigration is not a controversial issue in America. It is
No,
controversial
we
issue
saw
to a very
examples of that in that
progressive-
report at the outset. Let me bring in Jamie Kirchick on this. Jamie, is this just a presidential election like any other, or is there something off in the United States?
Well, regarding these accusations of fascism, it was actually a French philosopher, Jean-Francois Revel, who observed during the Cold War, in the 80s, I believe, when Ronald Reagan was president and Europeans were calling him a fascist, that the dark night of fascism is always descending in America, but it only lands in Europe. I mean, let's look at France. Let's look at Madame Le Pen. She's said some pretty nasty things in her career. Her father certainly has. Let's look at the AfD, the second biggest party in Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, a far-right party. They've certainly said, I mean, they've had leaders say that anyone crossing the border should be shot. Let's look at Viktor Orban in Hungary, whom, you know, sadly, Donald Trump looks to as a great leader. He's certainly responsible for saying nasty things about foreigners and other groups, by the way. So it doesn't take a lot of time to go across the European continent and find political leaders who've engaged in really nasty rhetoric. And so I think that these accusations of fascism being made
but none
by
of the
Harris
leaders
campaign,
that you've mentioned so far, Jamie, are the leaders of major powers. Here we're talking about the post of most powerful person in the world.
Yes, and look, I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump. I haven't voted for him. I voted this morning actually, and I did not vote for him. I'm no fan of his, and anyone can look up what I've written about him. But merely stating the fact that criminals have come into this country through the southern border because of open border policies by the current administration, that's just a statement of fact. I don't believe that that's racist. And I also find these accusations somewhat silly because Donald Trump has diversified. He has racially diversified the Republican Party more than any leader, really since George W. Bush, and maybe even more than him. Donald Trump is expected to gain a larger percent of the black vote than any Republican candidate since Dwight Eisenhower. He's basically matching Harris. He's 46, she's 49 for Latinos. So, you know, I trust the people of color who are, you know, voting for Donald Trump or intending to support him. I trust their instincts on whether or not, you know, he is an out-and-out racist, or whether or not they're looking at
audio
other
issue with Washington. We're going to try to fix that quickly. Apologies for that, Jamie Kirchick. There's an audio issue there. Kedevan Gorjestani, how is it breaking down? We know it's very close. Is it about minorities? Because last week we devoted an entire show to the fact that it's there's more of a gender gap than anything else in this election. Jamie's on point, though, when he says that there are more minorities voting for Donald Trump. How many of those are men?
Absolutely. There's clearly, the demographics are clearly moving, and we've seen it basically in all of the demographics. So to one point that was made, which is that the Republicans are becoming the working class party versus the Democrats, that is absolutely true. We're seeing that the higher educated tend to vote more for the Democrats now than they used to. There is the gender gap, as you mentioned. Kamala Harris has a huge lead among women, whether they're women of color, white women, educated, non-educated. That is also clear. And it's also clear that compared to the numbers of Joe Biden back in 2020, when you look at the demographics, whether it's African Americans, Latinos, Asians, there is a gap between what Joe Biden made as numbers and what Kamala Harris's polling numbers suggest. She has lost it a little bit among African Americans, for example, and there, as you mentioned, that gender gap does come into play because she seems to do much better among female voters of color rather than male. And if you add to that the age gap, she does much better with younger women and much worse with younger men. So all of these demographics are working together, and there's not one that will outright make you win. The only thing that some strategists are pointing to is that if you look at these demographics, the one common denominator for the Democrats, the positive for the Democrats, is that yes, they're losing in some of those demographics, but they are ahead and by a lot among demographics that are high propensity voters, like women, like older voters, like educated voters, which is not the case for Donald Trump. For example, one strategist, and I can't remember his name, said that he'd rather have women, a plus 15 gap with women, than have plus 10 with young men, because women tend to vote a little bit more than younger men. But this is all in a very tight race. And you could say, if you're losing in one demographic, you're gaining in the other, it doesn't really matter. But if it's decided with a few thousand votes in a handful of states, it can make the difference. And that is why you're seeing both of the campaigns not only firing up their base, but also going after every single one of these demographics, because if they can win even 2,000, 3,000 votes in all of these demographics, that could tip the balance.
All right. Let me ask you, Craig Tufte, I don't want to go into trying to predict who's going to win, because that seems like it's a perilous endeavor. But when you look at the data, has the United States changed, or is it just about these two candidates?
Probably both. I think that the candidates, obviously, again, I keep going back to numbers. Okay, when you have internal polling that indicates that you're, are you there?
I am there. It's my. It was my earpiece that was off earlier. Apologies to Jamie Kirchick, who I'll turn to after this. Craig Tufte, go ahead.
Thank you. Francois.
Go ahead, Craig Tufte, and then Jamie Kirchick.
Okay. My thought here is that basically it's going to get down to the ground game. Okay. We can talk about issues. We can talk about themes. We can talk about directions that campaigns are taking or candidates are taking, but it's going to get down to the ground game, okay, blocking and tackling, for lack of a better term. And I think that depending on who has the best ground game is where the action's going to be. The other things that, as far as polling is concerned, the tracking, they'll be utilizing, obviously, direct mail, the campaigns. We'll be doing social media, all of those things that generate interest and hopefully turnout for their candidate. But the thing is, I believe that everything is data driven. I think that what you're looking at, everybody can talk about issues. They can talk about things that have happened in the past, or what's going to happen in the future, or what someone said, or what someone's surrogate said. Basically, when it gets down to the bottom line, it's going to be get out the vote. Okay, I mean that's the dirty part of the. So
get out the vote, Craig Tufte. Just to illustrate for our viewers, does that mean actually getting an analog physical human being to go and accompany someone to a polling station? Does that still worth something?
That I've been part and parcel of campaigns that actually picked up people who requested rides to the polls. Okay, but usually it's generated by phone banks, direct mail, other tactics that campaigns utilize in order to energize their base, okay? And so it's a matter of you got to get the body to the poll if they haven't voted already. Now, Republicans historically have waited until Election Day to vote. That apparently is not the case now. I've heard anecdotal evidence of Republicans in various parts of the country who have already cast their vote. Okay, you have a situation in the state of Washington, apparently, when they're burning up ballots now, which is kind of an interesting.
We'll get to that point in a minute. Michael Furtick, let me ask you, because back in 2016, it took a couple of years for people to sink in, for the general public, this idea of micro-targeting. Some of what you just heard Craig Tufte touch upon. What's the difference between 2016 and 2024?
I mean, this is an extremely motivated electorate. I think your correspondent noted that some demographics historically have voted in smaller numbers or bigger numbers than others. That's true, but this is a very motivated electorate. So I think President Trump in the last election received more votes than anyone else in history, except possibly for Biden in that election, maybe even more than Hillary did in the popular vote in the election, which he won by electoral vote. 50 million, almost 50 million votes have already been cast in this election as of today. That's an extraordinary number, and the highest ever in early voting, and it's happening in both parties this year. Microtargeting is definitely an exceptional tool. You can get down to the sort of the atomic level with one person, the one person you want to reach. But I do think that the things that we are talking about now are much more useful to discuss. The Americans are sincerely interested in who's going to solve inflation. They are sincerely interested in who is going to solve immigration. They are sincerely interested in which president is more mentally stable. And by the way, they believe that Trump is stronger on inflation and immigration, but weaker on mental stability. Okay, they're sincerely interested in who is better to face off Xi Jinping and this axis of nastiness across the world that has emerged. And they think Trump is better suited than that. They are sincerely interested in abortion rights, and they think that Harris is stronger on abortion rights. So these are things that we don't need to kind of condescend to the American voters. We can give them the credence that they deserve, that they are, generally speaking, almost all of them, motivated by what they believe this candidate or that candidate will do for them and for the country, what they believe this candidate stands for and stands against. I think Harris's strongest point right now, if you like it or not, is that she's not Trump. She does not have that many natural constituencies of her own. She does not have a long history of leading populations around the country and building up constituencies of her own. The polling shows that mostly she's not Trump. People really feel strongly about Trump. They like him or they hate him. And that is the history of everybody who knows him up close and from afar, including the people up close. They know that he is both his strongest asset and his own strongest liability. I think that technology has been proven to be very powerful in this race, as it will in last race, but that is not especially new in 2020.
So, Jamie Kirchick, let me ask you, Kamala Harris's so-called closing argument speech taking place this Tuesday at the Ellipse, the same location at Washington's National Mall, where on January 6, 2021, Donald Trump told his supporters to fight like hell before they stormed the Capitol. When you're talking about what energizes each side, as we've just heard right now in this discussion from both Michael and Craig, is that a smart move going there today?
I do actually think so, because January 6th was an event that the vast majority of Americans thought was a disgrace. And I include a lot of Republicans and some Trump supporters in that analysis. And I think going there to remind people of that event is a smart move on the part of her campaign. Now, I don't know what she's going to say. I haven't read a script of that speech, but I'm sure it will lay heavily on calling Donald Trump a fascist, these themes that we've been hearing over the past couple of days. Because as Michael said, if you look at the issues, Donald Trump leads on most issues, right? On immigration, on inflation, on foreign policy even. He's leading on most issues. And so, her best argument, seeing that she can't really make an argument about the border, right? Because she was vice president while this all happened. She can't make an argument about inflation because she presided over it. She can't make a positive argument on so many of the policy issues, is that she really has to resort to the personality. And she's going to have to say that, this man is volatile. He is a hater. He only cares about himself. He's a scam artist. I mean, we're all familiar with these arguments. And it's really just a question of whether or not she'll be able to win the election based on those arguments, because the vast majority of Americans have decided who they're voting for. They've made their choice. There are some people who are in the middle, and they can be persuaded. And her campaign has decided that portraying Donald Trump as a fascist, which is a word that she has used on stage, on camera, they have clearly decided that that is the best argument that they have. I consider it, frankly, a kind of, what we in America would use a sports term, a Hail Mary pass in football. It's when you just throw the ball and you hope that someone catches it. And I really think that that's what the equivalent of this effort is on her part this late in the campaign.
All right, a chip and charge move, as we would say, for soccer or football on this side of the Atlantic. Ketevan Gorgistani, you remember last week there was this Donald Trump accusing the British Labour Party of foreign meddling. Labour's winning formula was that they let the Conservatives defeat themselves in the general election. Is Kamala Harris light on substance?
Look, she has, whether you like the policies or not, she has put out her policies. I agree that, yes, she's never going to be able to erase the last 4 years when it comes to immigration or the economy. That doesn't mean she hasn't put out plans and said what she would do, but it's not resonating enough with voters that she can continue to insist on that. She is going to likely insist on the theme of they are coming after your rights and focus on abortion, because that is the winning issue for the Democrats and for her personally, because if there is one topic on which she is not only better in polling, but also better at talking about than Joe Biden was even back in 2020, it is about abortion. She has, even when she was VP and I was following her, those were the speeches where she was the best. So she's likely going to insist on abortion. One thing I would say on the messaging of January 6th and the danger to democracy, I agree with the fact that using the term fascist is not what's going to work. However, one of the guests said that it was a way of reminding people of what happened on January 6th. I think that is also the strategy here. And one thing that has to be said is there are very few undecided people at this point. And most undecided people, if you listen to them a little bit, they tend to be decided on the person they would vote for if they went to vote. It's mostly undecided at whether you go to vote or not. And I'll finish on that, which is that the theme of the danger to democracy, when you are like Kamala Harris trying to build a tent of anti-Trumpers, the only common denominator between the progressives on the left of the Democratic Party and the never-Trumpers like Liz Cheney is the threat to democracy. It is not the economic policy of Kamala Harris. It is not abortion. It is not all of these other themes. That is the one common thing that they have in that big tent that she is hoping will come out to vote for her and will be enough for her to get into the White House.
Yeah, and so as we're saying, if it's all about energizing the base and every little bit helps, and there's sophisticated means of gauging the voters, there's a big argument over an old school media, an 11th hour non-endorsement making waves. Washington Post owner, that's a newspaper. Jeff Bezos, the same who's the billionaire boss of Amazon, breaking with tradition, refusing to choose between Harris and Trump. He ordered the paper's editorial staff to rewrite its column on this. More than 200,000 furious subscribers have since canceled their subscription. Bezos himself penning a piece where he argues that the newspaper endorsements don't sway voters. What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias, a perception of non-independence, ending them as a principled decision, and it's the right one. Critics, though, point to what he insists is purely a coincidence of the calendar. On the day it was pulled, executives from his aerospace company happened to be meeting with Donald Trump the same day. He argues, Michael Furtick, that he didn't even know the meeting was happening. Your thoughts on this?
First of all, the timing of his decision or of his announcement was terrible. He acknowledged that. I'm talking about Bezos. He acknowledged that in his own op-ed. He should have made this decision or announcement a year ago, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, even a month ago, frankly. Anything sort of better than last week. It was a disastrous timing. Jeff Bezos is financially sort of impregnable, untouchable. He's going to be a mega billionaire, whether Trump wins or Harris wins. I do think that it is a restoration of a tradition that the Washington Post used to have. They used to not endorse candidates in the presidential elections. And I do think that he is right about one important thing, that the sort of traditional media institutions have lost credibility with Americans anyway. I'd also say in Europe too, but with Americans anyway, for a lot of reasons. One, the Washington Post and others sort of embraced the messaging that turned out to be really deceptive. I'm going to use that word advisedly, deceptive, by the CDC and other health organizations in the United States and by the White House when it came to, and health officials across the United States when it came to the coronavirus pandemic. And that was a huge seismic shift in now the received understanding of the American people of how they should and should not trust media institutions. Journalists lost a lot of credibility for a lot of reasons, and deservedly so. And what institutions like the Washington Post continuously reveal their liberal biases. By the way, I grew up a very democratic liberal guy, so I had to see this for myself, but it's obvious plain as day that it's true. Then they actually lose the credibility in the long term, in the long run. Bezos is planning for the longer term and is investing for a future in which the Washington Post should regain its trustworthiness. And by the way, just to be clear, there is no, I'm often asked by European media especially, whether kind of the tech bros, whatever they are, whoever they are, this concept called a tech bro, have changed from sort of Democrats to Trump or from Harris to Trump in this election, whether Bezos' decision this week is an example of that. I think the answer is no. First of all, most of Silicon Valley still supports Harris. Most dollars from Silicon Valley still support Harris, and that will continue to be true for a while. And there is no kind of monolith. There is no clubhouse where the tech bros go, drink a beer and say, hey, let's do X or Y. These are people in constant competition and in fierce competitive discourse with one another with very many competing interests. And I urge you to take people seriously about what they believe. Almost always, in my experience, talking to people up close, when they say they want something for America politically, they sincerely want it. They do not want it because it's going to line their pockets. In the same way you do, in the same way I do, the same way your mom does and your sister does and your brother does. They want something sincerely and they support it. And I think you should give them that credibility in this case as well.
Jamie Kirchick, there was the so-called Gilded Age in the United States at the turn of the 20th century when the billionaires who, I guess they were then millionaires, I don't know what the exact numbers were, who influenced U.S. politics were magnates
Robber baron.
Robber barons, there you go. Were in things like the railroad industry, the steel industry, nascent oil industry. Today, the new gold is data. So this argument over which way, how much Silicon Valley has sway over politics is an important one.
Yes, but I just want to touch on the newspaper question, the question of the endorsement of the Washington Post, because I'm a journalist, I'm a career journalist, and this matters a lot to me. The Washington Post has lost half its readership in 4 years. It loses about $100 million a year. As Jeff Bezos noted in his editorial today, his op-ed last night, the mainstream media in this country has, Americans trust it less than they do Congress. It's one of the least trusted institutions in the United States. And that is a relatively recent development. And I would say it really took a precipitous fall in the early years of the Trump administration, because that was when the mainstream media decided that they were not going to report the news. They were going to take an advocacy position to defend democracy against this particular candidate and his particular political movement. And you see that in the downfall of the subscription numbers at the Washington Post and other mainstream media outlets. And the fact that 200,000 digital subscribers have now quit. They've canceled their subscription to the Washington Post. And the reason for that is because since 2016, they have been led to believe that the Washington Post, this paper that they loved, was basically MSNBC on paper. That's what they were led to believe. And now there's a new owner who, belatedly, in my opinion, this is very late, it may be too little too late, he's finally decided that he has to save this newspaper. And the way to do it is by making it more objective and making it more neutral.
But it is, Jamie,
an apparatus.
It is a conundrum because you're again, it's the there's good people on both sides argument, and that's what a lot of the editorial department at the Washington Post is angry about.
Can I just say, Francois, my
both sides
attitude towards Trump from the beginning I'm not both sides.
both sides
I'm
thing
going
you're
to tell you
One
what
at
I'm
a time.
both
Jamie
sides.
Kirchick first. Go ahead.
Can I finish? Can I say something?
Yeah.
Can I say something? The truth about Donald Trump is bad enough that you don't need to make anything up about him, okay? You don't need to make up that there was a Russia conspiracy to elect him president. You don't need to make up that he's a fascist. All these accusations against him, these outlandish, dramatic, sentimental, ridiculous claims that have been made about this man, it only helps him. And that's kind of the reason why he's probably going to win re-election next week. And so if I have one piece of advice to my colleagues in the media, it's just to understand the truth is bad enough about this guy. You don't need to exaggerate or lie about him.
Craig Tufte, will you still be reading those legacy newspapers? Is that part of where you get your information? And how are voters getting their information?
You're bringing up a very good point. You have so much social media out there right now. X, for instance. Joe Rogan had 93 million people watching that podcast with Trump. Okay, that's huge, and it's not only his podcast. There are other things that are going on via social media that are generating news, that are correcting and also misinforming a lot of individuals. Yes, the mainstream media is no longer there.
Kedivan Gorjestani.
One thing that is a little bit contradictory when you look at the changing landscape of media, and we saw, and you mentioned Joe Rogan, but there were this
is a famous podcast.
Exactly, but this sort of the podcast election, as it's been called, because you had Call Her Daddy, you had the other types of podcasts to sort of go to a certain demographic. What's interesting is that the criticism that there is about the mainstream media, which is that they are a mouthpiece for the Democrats, if it's the Washington Post, or a mouthpiece for the Republicans, if you're talking about Fox News. When you look at where the people are getting their information, they're increasingly getting their information from people that they agree with, from very opinionated podcasts, very opinionated social media accounts. And so what they're rejecting in the mainstream media is actually what they're going after in a different form. So it's very interesting to see how this is changing. And I think we all agree that big part of the issue with the question of not endorsing was really the timing, because there are plenty of countries in the world that don't endorse, where media don't endorse leaders in elections. They don't choose a side. And I think that does in a way feed in this thing that you are on one side or the other, because people don't necessarily make the difference between opinion and the actual news. But in itself, questioning the idea of should we as mainstream media or not mainstream media actually endorse a candidate is a good question to ask. The sad thing is, I don't remember who said it, but it was like, if it had been done a year ago, that would have made more sense, because you just say from the get-go at the start of the campaign, we're not going to endorse, and that's it.
And as Michael was saying, he recognized it himself. Kedivan Gorjestani, I want to thank you. I wish we had more time. We're only skimming the surface on this one. Jamie Kirchick and Craig Tufte in Washington, Michael Furtick in Rome. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thanks a lot.